This video is sponsored by a rep. Make sure to check them out in the link in the description and use code JACK10 to get 10% off of the best MMA merchandise, streetwear, and all of that. Go check it out in the link in the description and enjoy the video. Alright, I'm already looking forward to looking at some of the hate comments in the videos defending KSI and Jake Paul, but I just have to say that these two are probably one of the most embarrassing individuals to ever compete in combat sports, because the delusion on both of these guys and just the pure embarrassing things that they put online. So for those of you guys that don't know even what I'm talking about, Jake Paul, KSI, they both started off as YouTubers, very similar, and KSI was like the first one to take up this YouTube boxing, kind of boxed on like an amateur level, then called out Jake Paul, Logan Paul, and eventually they got into boxing as well.
Jake Paul, Logan Paul, any of the Pauls, I don't care. Bring it.
KSI fighting Logan Paul, Jake Paul's brother, fought twice. Eventually, KSI did beat him. And since KSI beat Logan Paul, you know, Jake has just been on another level. Like, he has been grinding, and that is something I won't take away from either of them. You could tell, obviously, that they both work hard, but you could just tell, you know, Jake has been grinding, taking it very seriously. Worked with Shane Mosley, who he's now training with again, which I'm very happy to see. And you guys aren't going to hear me criticize the work ethic of these two or how they've managed to pick up boxing. What is embarrassing to me is their resume, and I know this is something that a lot of people have said, and I know what a lot of you guys are going to be saying. If you look at Ryan Garcia's record, you're going to see bums too, which is true, yes, but I hate to break it to everybody, but this isn't pro boxing. And to be honest, it's pretty embarrassing when both of these guys do say or pretend that this is pro boxing. What do I mean by this? The breaking point and the point of this whole video is going to be breaking down their resumes. Jake Paul and KSI constantly go back and forth online roasting each other's resumes, and I am just sick and tired of hearing who has the worst resume, because let's be honest, both these guys do not have good resumes. Jake Paul's is miles better, I will say that. Let's first break down Jake Paul. Alright, Jake Paul, you know, his pro debut was against Ennis and Gibb. He had an amateur bout against Deji. Was a pretty close fight, but that's a very different Jake than who we have now, so I'm not even going to bother talking about that. He fought a Nissan Gibb, and this was very impressive at the time, you know, especially we've seen Gibb now evolve to a lot better of a fighter, and in my opinion, a fighter who could beat KSI. And Jake just dismantled him, which is pretty impressive. A lot of people are going to say, oh, Gibb was a bum then. He really wasn't. Like, you didn't see any other YouTube guy really taking out Gibb, and while it wasn't really like a clean knockout and was kind of like a weird 3 knockdown rule, it was still impressive. Then a year passes, and on the Mike Tyson card, Jake Paul fights Nate Robinson, a basketball player. Pretty much goes as everybody would expect. Jake brutally knocks him out. And then we go to Ben Askren, which Ben Askren, like, at the time, yes, the fight was a little competitive. A lot of people were saying, hey, Ben Askren was going to win as well as me, and obviously that's kind of a joke of a take now. And honestly, it was impressive. Yes, Ben Askren doesn't know how to box, but still, this guy was a combat sports champion, you know? He had taken a lot of damage throughout his career, had a good chin, despite that Masvidal knockout. And this is where my problem with Jake Paul begins, because yes, I do think it's actually really impressive for a YouTuber to go out there and say, hey, I'm gonna fight MMA fighters. Even Tyron Woodley, who he fought next and even knocked out cold, which is probably the most impressive knockout in this whole YouTube scene. But Jake just always talks on and on about how he's a real boxer, how he wants to fight Canelo, how he could beat Canelo. That is my problem. You're delusional. You're not even fighting boxers, and we're gonna get to Tommy Fury, because eventually he does fight Tommy Fury after fighting Anderson Silva, which Anderson Silva, you know, you could say, yes, he's old. It's still very impressive. It was impressive how he outboxed him. I think that was a good win for Jake Paul. Then he fights Tommy Fury, and basically Tommy Fury dominated him. Look, it wasn't like any clean knockdown. It wasn't necessarily a battering, but Jake had pretty much no success. I mean, maybe you give him 2 rounds. That last round you give him because of the knockdown, but other than that, that was Tommy Fury's round. And to be honest, I don't want to see Jake Paul fight Tommy Fury. I don't want to see him fight a boxer. But the problem is you can't talk shit and you can't say, hey, I'm going to fight a boxer, because then that opens you up to scrutiny. And now we're at a point where Jake Paul is going to be fighting Nate Diaz, which is like, bro, now you're going back to MMA fighters. And look, Nate Diaz has a legendary chin, and I'm going to be sad if he gets knocked out. Like, I'm going to probably borderline cry. Jake Paul is going to beat Nate Diaz. Like, there's probably no chance, especially that there's an 8-round fight. If this was maybe 12 rounds, okay, maybe Nate Diaz get poured on in the later rounds. Nate Diaz is going to lose this fight, and I think he'll probably get knocked down, maybe even knocked out, and we'll probably never see him in the UFC, and we'll never see Conor versus Nate 3, all because of Jake Paul. But it's so hard to criticize this resume when looking at his opponent, KSI. This guy's resume is ridiculous. I don't know who's in charge of this. First of all, you know, like I said, he had an amateur bout against Joe Weller and Logan Paul, and then his first pro fight was against Logan Paul. Looked terrible in that fight. Did get the win because I think, in my opinion, Logan isn't really too good of a boxer either. Like, Jake is definitely the best one out of everybody. then KSI returns about 2-3 years later, and he fights 2 dudes in one night. Guys, one of them was, yes, a pro fighter with a professional record of 2-7 on like 1 week's notice, and the other guy was a rapper who never boxed before, also picking this up in 2 weeks notice. So you couldn't really get anything out of those fights, and honestly KSI looked pretty bad there too. But then we got to the FaZe Temper fight, which I broke down recently. If you guys want to check that out, I'll put it on the screen, but I did an in-depth breakdown of that fight, and honestly I praised KSI a lot in that performance. Yes, he made some mistakes technically, but I thought that was definitely his best performance to date, brutally knocking out FaZe Temper. And this is another thing that honestly really gets me upset. KSI only picked FaZe Temper because he was a southpaw. He could have picked a better opponent. He could have picked Slim. He could have picked Tyron Woodley. This guy is not a real fighter. And whatever you want to say about Jake, Jake is a real fighter, only because I respect the fact that he took Tyron Woodley on like 2 weeks notice while preparing for Tommy Fury. And you can criticize Jake and say, yes, his opponents are old, which is true, but they're definitely leagues above KSI's opponent. And now we're getting to his new opponent, Joe Fournier, who's going to be facing in less than a month. Now, this is a guy with 9 wins and 0 losses, which, yes, on paper it looks good, but you look at his fights, you look at his record, the guy isn't good. And people want to compare Joe Fournier to Tommy Fury. I think that this is a step up for KSI, and yes, I give him credit for that, but like I said, it's just kind of frustrating. Look, in conclusion, guys, I respect a lot of the work that these two put in. Yes, Jake Paul, KSI definitely work very hard. You can tell by the physical shape that they come in, you can tell by the improvements that they make. And I do think that a fight between these two is actually a lot closer than a lot of people think, because Jake Paul isn't really that good of a boxer, and a lot of times when you're learning boxing, it's hard to kind of fight someone that's so unorthodox like KSI. So I think both these guys have good attributes to fight each other, and I think that's still a fight that should happen. But I think I speak for everyone when I say I'm sick of the back and forth. The back and forth has been going on for 3 years. I have always been excited for this fight. I'm not much of like a YouTube boxing hater. Like, I always watch the events. Well, I shouldn't say always, but I usually watch the major ones. I plan on watching this weekend when Gibb fights. I'm definitely going to watch Jake Paul and Nate Diaz, but just fight each other. I mean, we had a perfect opportunity for August. I don't want to see Jake versus Nate Diaz. I don't want to see Nate Diaz get knocked out. I just want to see you fight KSI, Jake. And then if you win, go fight Tommy Fury again. I really don't care what happens after that. This is what everybody cares about. KSI, nobody cares about Joe Fournier. Nobody even knows who he is. We all know he's a joke of a fighter. And I don't mean to disrespect anybody, because I know I'm coming off super disrespectful, but at the end of the day, I say this just constructively. Please fight each other. That's all we want to see. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys haven't already liked the video, hit the subscribe button, like, comment, and share. Just a reminder that this weekend we're going to be live at 8 p.m. Eastern time watching the Ryan Garcia fight, so tune in for there. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. This video is sponsored by Rep. Make sure to check them out in the link in the description and use code JACK10 to get 10% off of the best MMA merchandise, streetwear, and all of that. Go check it out in the link in the description and enjoy the video.